welcome to the webinar today on the State of Employee Engagement 2023. Today we'll be talking about the report that we launched as WorkBuzz and how we have unlocked it to learn more about HR professionals' priorities and challenges. Today's webinar is co-hosted by myself. My name is Melasan or Mel Foster, and I'm responsible for our customer experience here at WorkBuzz. I'm also joined by the wonderful Stephen Frost. Steve, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I think my parents call me Stephen and have been naughty, but now called me Steve. Thank you, Mel, for hosting today. Really excited to be here, and feel really privileged. We have some of you join today. Hopefully, we'll all take away one nugget, at least one thing you can take away and apply to your people strategy going forwards.
Great. And although we are hosting this webinar, as always in true WorkBuzz fashion, we would love to take any questions from the audience. If you have a question that arises as we go, then please ask it. We will round to them at the appropriate time in the webinar and hopefully answer everybody's. But of course, if you're like Steve and you come up with your best questions after the meeting's happened, you can also email us after, and there is an email address that we will share towards the end of the webinar.
Although it's not just me who wish I was that smart to have the best ideas in the room. It tends to come around the corner and car park, don't they?
Very true. In terms of the agenda today, what we'll be covering is what the state of employee engagement is. It's really important to us to share a little bit of the background and history of this report and where we are now. Secondly, the top trends and biggest changes in HR priorities that we've seen. It's been almost like the top, I feel like top of the pops here, but we've got a lot of movers and shakers that we want to take you through. Then we'll be talking about how to optimize your employee listening strategy based on some of those shifts. And then a final subject that we want to touch on during this webinar is how AI is shaping HR.
I think any presentation webinar will be complete without those two letters AI. But we have some research around some quite interesting insights into how that's affecting HR, how you're prioritising going forwards. I think just to start, so we want to share that you hot off the press with a view. We'll perhaps do a deeper dive on AI in upcoming webinars, and also for those of you who may be attending WorkBuzz Live, our flagship flagship event for our clients next Wednesday at Leonardo Hotels. All our clients we'll look at some sessions on AI too.
Yeah.
So just a bit of context and state of employee engagement. It's worthwhile saying, Mel, this webinar is being recorded.
Yes.
If I think some of you, if you're like me, you'll be scribbling down the steam come off your pen and pencils, and it is recorded, and you've got slides afterwards too. But just to set the scene, so WorkBuzz is 5 years old. We were 5 years old as of about a week ago when we launched WorkBuzz as a brand and platform. And feel super lucky to work with around 400 clients, a lot of you on today's call. And ever since we've been around, we've gone out to anywhere between 300 and 500 HR professionals to really understand what are your biggest challenges at the moment. And I have here, and it's a exclusive copy of our 2018 report. I still have it to hand. I treasure this. And what we've done over time is really look at some of those external factors going in. So none of us could have predicted in 2018 we would have a global pandemic. We couldn't have predicted that shift to hybrid working. And what we're seeing now is starting to see a lot of organizations rowing back from hybrid working. I think an article on LinkedIn yesterday that more people are office white-collar roles are now working in office 5 days a week than hybrids. It's fascinating to see how that changes and how we can influence to try to find that right balance too. And for me, it's one of my favourite pieces of research we do because it is based on feedback this year on 450 senior HR practitioners across the UK and in the US. So I feel really privileged for those of you taking part in that research. Big thank you. And what we'll try to do today is share with you those key headlines, but also provide some actual feedback. So not just what those biggest priorities are, but a few of the risks to be aware of, a few opportunities to build into a people plan too, with an emphasis on employee listening based on our specialism as well. So you'll hopefully take away one or two nuggets from today. So this is our fourth edition, and it allows us to see how those trends are moving over time. And over the last 5 years, really what we found is, first of all, a shift towards more regular employee listening. When we published the inaugural report in 2018, we found the vast majority of organisations, roughly two-thirds, were relying on an annual survey. What we've seen over the last few years, really accelerated by the growth of hybrid working and the pandemic, is that shift toward more regular listening. So more regular pulse surveys, listening across the employee life cycle. So, and I think that's a really positive step to give employees a voice. And because of that huge amount of change, the idea of an annual survey once a year doesn't really cut it with that amount of change. So we've seen that trend over the last 5 years. And what we're going to talk about today is how that has progressed forward backwards, and a real deep dive on employee listening. Second, what we found is a real focus on employee well-being. I think the two factors. I think if I was watching my sins on, we flew out to the US recently, and on the plane, for a big HR tag, and on the plane, there was the David Beckham documentary. Some of you may have seen it with Guilty Pleasure.
Of course.
And I think for those of you, even if you're not into football, you may remember when he got sent off in the 1998 World Cup, and huge pressure for a 23-year-old kid in terms of crucified in the media. I don't think that will happen to the same extent now. People saying he's let down his country, on that, and with all of this focus on mental health now, I think sort of sports people are held accountable and are celebrated around a lot of money, but we pay much more focus to mental health in a way we didn't sort of a generation ago. So I think part of due to that change, I think in particular due to the pandemic and flexible working, employees now expect their employer to care about their mental health and well-being, and to prioritise that, and much more than mental health. We know is much more than employee benefits. It's a whole strategy around that. So we've seen that shift over the last few years. And what we're doing on today's webinar is really look at how that's evolved over the last 12 months too. And I don't want to give it away, but it's much more important in terms of priorities than it was a year ago. And thirdly, we've really seen another deep dive over the last couple of years, the focus of leaders on having a huge impact on engagement, and in particular, the shadow they cast. And we've seen HR really step up since the pandemic, become those agents of change, and partners with their C-suites on helping understand how does that changing world of work and employee expectations, how to involve their employees in shaping change, how to find the right balance for hybrid working, so you can access hard to reach talent that may not want to be in the office 5 days a week, but also to find that right balance for business too, particularly if you're an organisation where a large part of your workforce can't work remotely, that if you're in manufacturing or care, whatever it may be. So that's some of the 4 other biggest shifts we've seen since we've been running our research over the last 5 years. And we're going to give some context when we come on to how things have changed over the last 12 months. And in terms of key headlines, when we start talking about priorities, just the context, what we've seen, employee engagement remains a challenge for most organisations. In the past, we've highlighted deskless organisations, those who were frontline workers that can't work remotely. We saw employee engagement dip last year and the year before, as they were under extreme pressure with the pandemic, weren't able to work remotely, really put their health and well-being on the line as sort of key workers. It's important we don't forget that. And what we found this year, when we asked the 450 participants in the research this year, how has employee engagement changed? We found slightly more, 36% say it's improved and declined, but overall, a fairly steady picture on the past, not a huge improvement in engagement, and sort of 3/4 of organisations there or thereabouts, or 2/3 say it's about the same or hasn't really improved. Still lots we can do. Linked to that, when we come on to some of the key challenges this year, which Mel's presents in a few minutes, it's worth us thinking about the context we operate in. So in last year's research, we just had the start of the cost of living crisis that hadn't really washed through. We had the research last summer. We had the awful events in Ukraine, that war on our European doorstep that hadn't really washed through to the high sustained inflation we have now. Whereas this year's reports, we have that. So we've seen inflation the highest many of us can remember in terms of sort of 10, 11%, thankfully declining. When we did this research in the summer, inflation still 7 or 8% around that. We've seen the pressure that's pulled on our employees, our everyday heroes, with being squeezed in terms of that cost of living crisis. We've seen for some of our clients in certain sectors, employees having to look for roles that pay more to make the bills. And we've seen over the last couple of quarters, employers respond where they can with pay rises. I think the latest data sort of 8%, which is sort of compared to where a couple of years ago, much, much higher. But it also creates challenges for organizations too. We know certain sectors, particularly with consumers, are under pressure in sectors like retail. We know if you're a house builder in certain sectors of that part of the economy, sort of manufacturing as well.
Taking on the cost.
Yes, some of our clients in foods manufacturing seen a big impact there too. So we know employers are not insulated from those inflationary pressures. And I know from lots of HR leaders I speak to, sometimes feel squeezed between your employees and struggling and really have been struggling with CFO and a C-suite. So also trying to protect the business in the long run. I can't always pass those price rises on to customers. So a really turbulent time over the last 12 months. And we felt it really important for that context.
Yes.
Because I think it lends itself heavily to some of the movements we've seen, to all the priorities and challenges for HR going forwards.
So in terms of some of the top priorities, what we've seen is certain things leap and move. As I said at the start, it's very much top of pops here with lots of movers and shakers. But really, since our 2022 report, there has been a standout number one on the chart for a while, and it's retention. Retention's leapt to the top of this list. I think it was number 3 in 2022, but you can see it's gone up 2 places here and at 36 percentage points in terms of the number of respondents that say that it's a top priority for them. It demonstrates that over a third of you are struggling with this on your day-to-day. What we've seen as the second priority called out is employee well-being. The piece that Steve's alluding to around the macro environment and the challenges that we're all facing as human beings, I think is really coming through here, where employee well-being has risen by 5 points to this second spot because it's becoming much more openly discussed. It's something that we're trying to achieve for ourselves as individuals. Our employers are trying to make sure that we support in the right way.
I think expected to as well.
Yeah.
In terms of a lot of younger generation. So they come to expect their employer to sort of help prioritise their mental well-being too.
Yes.
And well-being as well.
Yeah, and we've got the pressures around cost of living that create even more pressure on financial well-being. And I think financial well-being is quite often a starting point, and it's almost a domino effect with financial well-being. If you're struggling to cope with your finances, it can have a knock-on impact to every other part of your well-being. Mentally, emotionally, your health and your physical health, I mean, can even be affected by that. And seeing that long tail come through, I think, is really important to keep on the agenda and keep discussing. And also, I think, frankly, it's been one of the subjects that the leaders of the past, who haven't always been brought into newer initiatives or softer HR initiatives, have absolutely got behind wellbeing, because we've seen that impact. We've felt it on COVID ourselves, whilst the pandemic was happening and occurring, and that isolation. We have seen it come to the forefront and that impact on business. The third priority we're seeing is recruitment. So that's dropped 1 place. It was the second in 2022's report. But recruitment obviously goes very much hand in hand with our number 1 priority of retention. It's all about getting the right people in, and what we'll do is unlock some more of this. And I think what is really interesting to us at WorkBuzz are those that have significantly moved as well. So if I just call out number 4, performance and productivity, number 4, it's not too far away from number 3 anyway. Performance and productivity had got up by 6 places on our list.
Really wasn't in that top half. I haven't featured that high ever before.
Not at all. Not from our HR professionals that we're surveying and we're asking directly. Maybe if we'd asked CEOs and CFOs in the past, this would have always been there for them. But for HR professionals, there's been this huge shift of this dynamic of needing to focus on performance and productivity and demonstrate that return for the wider business. And that's something we'll talk about in a bit wider. And the other one that I just want to call out whilst we're on this slide is a big drop for learning and development, down by 5 places. And I'm going to call it out here, but I'm not going to spoil my fun for later, because there's a little bit more that speaks to why we need to make sure learning and development, although it's dropped from our top priorities, it actually plays a key role in supporting some of the top priorities that are in number 1, 2, and 3 position. So making sure that we don't lose sight of the importance of soft skills and building for the future.
So I think just going back a step for a second, I think in terms of those key headlines, that retention up, so the recruitment's still important, but retention that biggest priority. A lot of our clients talk about one of the ways you can save money is retaining great talent. It costs a lot more to recruit, for them to get competent and so on. And we've seen some of those sort of slight contradictions we come on to where you've got talent shortages and you can't find great talent, but we won't invest a lot of time developing talent. So I'm going to call out some of that stuff in a few minutes. What we've also found a little bit contradictory as well is one of the only ways to sustainably retain great talent and build a culture where you really are a talent magnet for attracting and retaining great talent is really by improving employee engagement. And one of the things we found this year is the first this has happened since we sort of created the research report. We found a steady shift away from legacy annual surveys. We're going through about twice a year in terms of, can you imagine 2 years ago how much it changed, or a year ago how much it's changed since. We have organisations listening to their employees more regularly, and it's not to say if you're an organisation where your employees aren't office based, the idea in weekly surveys just doesn't work, or I haven't seen it work yet. That's the frequency. You need time to act on the feedback. You need time to sort of invite employees to provide that feedback too. What we have seen is just shifts across our client base and the data shifting from long annual census driven service to more regular listening, trying to find the right cadence for your organisation. It's not one size fits all. And we've seen last year a big adoption of onboarding surveys in particular to drive retention of new starters. One of the things we wanted to highlight was a slight step backwards over the last 12 months as we focus on sort of shorter term sort of focus on retention, improving productivity, and thoughts perhaps to sort of justify giving higher pay rises and trying to find those increases in productivity to offset that. One of the risks we have is around employee voice. We've seen a slight drop off of more regular listening, still nowhere where we were in 2018 when we first started this research. We're still much higher adoption of more regular listening, but just to be aware of in terms of your organisation, do we have the right frequency for employee voice? And in similar ways, we spoke big about the drop off in prioritised learning development, despite we've got talent shortages. Just trying to make sure we're doing things sustainably to drive retention and productivity, not just now but later. And this slide that talks about that in terms of the pace of listening. So annually, roughly the same what it was last year, but a reduction in organisations getting quarterly feedback, which is what we tend to see. A lot of our clients run quarterly. If you're a white collar audience, or every 6 months. If you're a blue collar organisation, you should just be aware of actually you're still touching base with your employees regularly enough, based on a huge amount of change we're going through, and perhaps we've got this next wave coming with AI already impacting some customer facing roles already, and some of those knowledge workers too.
Agreed. And I think it's really important what you say there about, a lot of people ask us quite often about how do you avoid survey fatigue, and understanding all the surveys that you have running and what touch points in terms of that employee life cycle. You're running onboarding, are you running return to work, so you're running on-demand polls and understanding different topics as you go. But that typical baseline measure is definitely a shift in the market. We're going to move into the top trends and biggest changes in HR priorities. But before I kind of cover the content of the slide, what I just want to do is answer this question. Somebody's asked, where do our stats come from the top priority slide? So just for complete clarification, all of the data points we're showing you in this presentation are from our research of state of employee engagement from this year. That's ran as a survey. It was responded to by over 450 HR professionals. So that's where this has come from. It's their votes for the top priorities.
It is the best audience.
Yeah.
Public sector, private sector, third sector, organisations, sort of 20,000 headcount, organisations with 50 headcount, so really diverse. So data. What we will be doing, we want to give you sort of exclusive sort of insight in terms of the report, which is sort of the ink is still wet on the paper. But what we'll be doing over the coming weeks and months is doing a deep dive into these areas too.
Yeah.
So this is very much about the key headlines about research, and we'll be shining a light on some of these areas in more depth in future webinars.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think there will be other stats that we show, but they will be referenced as well. I'm doing an MBA module, so hot on referencing at the moment, Steve will tell you, annoyingly for everybody else in the organisation. So, right, this is just a repeat of the slide just to keep it front of mind for you all, as in it's the same slide I've shown you. Key things to be of note are around those movers and shakers of employee wellbeing up 5 places, performance and productivity up 6, learning and development down 5, but just making sure that we also understand that there's the top priorities that are coming out: retention, wellbeing, recruitment. But this piece around performance and productivity, we're going to look at quite deeply on this webinar, just because we think this is signalling quite a shift in terms of the expectations placed on HR and people teams at present.
Well, I mean, what HR have done so well over the last couple of years is really step up as those agency chains and have that really strong seat around the board table, because you've been really badly needed throughout the pandemic to step up with all that change to how we work. And as human beings, what our fears are for the first time ever, a lot of people thinking about mortality and so on. I think equally there's an opportunity to step up now. And I think in terms of thinking about how do we evidence how we're improving and driving the productivity performance agenda, how we're helping the business to save money, work, do more with less and be more efficient is definitely front of mind. And though a lot of CFOs I talk about, it's again, how do we make that link clearer? So that's one of the themes through some of the slides coming up.
Okay. Steve. Right. So in terms of starting with top priorities, retention is one that we wanted to deep dive on. Of course, it is quite a clear focus for everybody being number one. And it's more important, but it's also getting more difficult. What we've seen is the call out of the slides, but about half of the people responding to this saying it's actually getting harder than prior years. And what we're seeing around retention is the piece around offering a competitive salary and benefits package versus competitors within your space being the top reason for the difficulty and challenge that you're seeing, which is really interesting. It's topped by quite a proportion, as in almost 18% higher at 45% than the secondary reason around the retention challenges that we're seeing. And what that alludes to for me is almost that hygiene factor is really difficult to get right now. It's not just the salary, though, it's the benefits piece. And again, that has links into well-being, doesn't it, when we talk about benefits? Because now if you come and speak to people about benefits, what they expect in terms of that employee offer to them is that I can have a hybrid working arrangement. The benefits package that you're offering me, do I have access to this in terms of healthcare, my retirement plan, can I opt in for X, Y, and Z? So I think people are reading more, they're seeing benefits more widely and what the best employers and top employers can achieve. So they are asking for more, understandably.
How do just sort of challenge your head cap? I think one of the things I always think about is which sectors have always had this problem in terms of shortage of really good people.
Yeah.
And what they do, what they've done to respond, can we learn from them? And I think care is a really good example. We were lucky enough to work with some amazing care organisations. where because of the economics of their marketplace, and particularly if they're relying on to the public sector funding, there's a limit to how much physically and economically they can pay their caregivers as a ceiling.
Yeah.
If they overshoot that, the business isn't sustainable. And it's trying to get how can we, where we can offer pay rises, but you can't always offer the most. If you're competing against certain supermarket chains or others where everyone's different. So I think as a HR leader, how can you create that culture and these softer areas where you may not be able to compete head to head just on pay, as much as you can do, but compete on culture. How do you convey your employer brands? As well within some of those constraints.
Yeah, I think sometimes it becomes a bit of a joking tit for tat, and it's almost the grass isn't always greener, and just because you get £60 more over the road doesn't mean it's worthwhile. Sometimes people have to go through those experiences to realise how good it is within in terms of your wider offer and the experience that they have with you. Secondary reason then is meeting employees' expectations in terms of career development. And I think we've spoken a lot about this, and there was a recent webinar on generational differences. But generations have quite different expectations around what they'll receive in terms of their career development and what they want to achieve within different timeframes. I think we're now grappling in between completely different expectation sets, where we've got older generations that are happy with jobs for life, employers for life, and wanting to grow their own skills and quite content. But then the millennials and the next generation coming in terms of Y, Z, Alpha, even coming up through the ranks, that won't want to stay in the same role any longer than realistically for 2 years. So how can we give them those development points to enable them to stay for longer and see a pathway? Then the following reasons, again, it's quite a significant drop to the following reasons, that buy-in to the culture, flexible working arrangements has dropped quite significantly, lack of training and upskilling opportunities, and then involuntary turnover. Nothing there. Okay. Right. We know this was number 3, but we thought this goes so well hand in hand in terms of retention. We've pulled recruitment in here as well. We're finding that skill shortages are impacting recruitment efforts. So what we're seeing is 60% of people responding to the survey said it's actually getting harder to recruit. And very few of you saying it's getting easier. It's my market now. It's not as easy as it was. And what we're seeing in terms of that top reason by another 18% is the shortage of qualified candidates with the right skills. Which, if you think back to what I've shared in terms of the top priorities and what Steve and I were saying at learning and development dropping 5 points, is quite interesting. It's a bit of a juxtaposition. So it's not so much of a priority for us to focus on learning and development, but we are seeing a struggle when we're recruiting for those people that are qualified. Personally, it makes me think back to some experience I had at Countrywide Surveyors. So I was there during the period pre-COVID, before I joined WorkBuzz. I'd had a life before WorkBuzz. This is crazy. I often bring it up to Steve because it gets him upset. But with the Countrywide, I worked with some amazing, very mindful MDs that were really thinking about the future of surveying, and that time it was becoming very much aging workforce. So what they had to do, and what they decided to do, was invest in an apprenticeship scheme that brought in a load of new blood into the surveying profession. And that did not just Countrywide, but pretty much anyone around them a huge favour, because it enabled them to build the skills, capabilities that were needed for the future. But it was very much a long-term play of investment. But sometimes that's what we need to do to build that skill set, or think about how we redeploy skills that are being used elsewhere into jobs that we have now, and utilise them in a different way. But I think we're seeing that across every industry, really, in terms of the report, seeing it in construction to hospitality as well. So it's just sometimes, I think, being a bit more creative with finding the right candidate.
Longer term perspective, isn't it? I think as HR leaders, it's absolutely challenging your CEOs, CFOs who are having problems recruiting because of lack of skills.
Yeah.
Is what you do in longer term to build your pipeline.
Yeah, very true. I'm just going to bring up this now in Catherine. So is this more to do with providing the right kind of L&D? Having worked for a commercial L&D company in a previous role, actual needs were not always fully researched and considered. I think that's fair. I think possibly quite true, Catherine, and something that we could unpick with further research in. But I think for us, what's interesting is almost that it's L&D from the perspective of overall view of L&D has dropped below everything else in the priorities.
Sort of solutions.
Yes, yeah, but I do think that maybe we're focused too much on that short term stuff. Can you have got the skills for the job? So we're doing that quite well, but we're not focusing on those deeper skills that will get us to the future stages. Really good. And interesting insight as well. Thank you, Catherine. Secondary reasons, meeting candidates' salary expectations. So very much paired with the last slide I showed you. And then find other reasons that you can see listed here. We've got competition for similar organisations hiring for similar roles. Finding people who are the right cultural fit, being able to hire quickly enough, and the cost of recruitment is quite a low reason there. I think ultimately skills critical. I love this insight. Thank you, Carla, Jane. Also, sometimes the JD is not particularly well written to support exactly what skills are needed. Here. I absolutely think there's so much work that can be done around so many job descriptions that we see advertised, and we don't call out skills really, or what transferable skills would apply for this role. I think that's really important to think about how you widen the net if this is an area that you're struggling with. Yeah, great pointer and tip, Carla, there, I think. Okay. Well-being, right. So we've talked a lot about the climate, and we see this as driven by the climate around people taking more personal ownership on their well-being. There's a lot more care involved, and I think people really expect their employers, as we were saying, to care more and to support them. This on the left-hand side are parts of our own research. So we've seen that the increase of wellbeing up by 5 places to be the second spot of priority. But what we've seen over the years is wellbeing trending downwards over the years. And I think what this has alluded to as well is sometimes at the moment people are more cognizant of their wellbeing, but also more willing to share with their employer when they're struggling. So I do think there's a little bit of a false
the link there, isn't it?
Yeah, because people are becoming more honest. We see this in engagement quite often.
Yeah.
For quite a while, people may feel that they've got great scores, but once people start telling the truth, it may differ a while. But with wellbeing, I think people are more happy to be themselves at work, stand up for who they are, and share that.
I think I look at this positively in terms of sort of employees are expecting us to do more in terms of helping with their well-being. They're less satisfied in terms of their answers in our surveys, in terms of some of these answers. We ask them to rate their mental health, for example.
Yeah.
That's where those declining scores really signpost for us. We want to focus more on there. And we've seen this year HR well-being shift up to their second top priorities, whereas some of the other trends in the research for me feels like there's a risk of focus too much in the short term.
Yes.
This feels like a really positive step going forward. It's something which we're going to do a deep dive on in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's also just being mindful, though, that we're not focusing on wellbeing for the short term to get the return on investment. So some of the headlines we showed you at the start of the webinar about us losing days in terms of sickness through BBC for that headline. I think it was a really bad headline, poorly written by BBC, but almost damaging, that trust in the employees to do what they need to do. But I think what's great to see is that there's a wealth of information and support on employee wellbeing, and this is just from the CIPD. Everybody knows, but in terms of the benefits of employee wellbeing, we see it all, but it's important to link them all through as well. And this is what I was alluding to earlier around financial wellbeing. You can't just see in isolation. You have to think about how it affects everything, and that's the same with the good lifestyle choices, social time. Isolation is one of the most brutal killers around in the UK, at least. And thinking about how we overcome those things, making sure we've got growth, the right values and principles for people, they're taking part in work that they see is good and fulfilling for them, and that their health is kept front of mind. It is very easy to burn yourself out. So by us prioritising employee wellbeing, role modelling it in the right way as leaders, I think we'll come to more positive outcomes, not just for our people, but for business as well. And then finally, just to touch on performance and productivity around here, what we wanted to do was demonstrate that it's ultimately not getting much better. Around 77% saying it's not getting any better. A lot of people saying, frankly, it's the same than what I've seen before. That's the majority here. But the biggest performance and productivity challenges we're seeing are recruiting people with the right skills or upskilling and training existing employees. Can you see the narrative link through around performance and productivity? If that's our challenge here, and also it's our challenge on recruitment, and we've got pieces around the skills that we need. For me, it then links back to the importance of making sure L&D doesn't fall off completely off the table, and we keep that long view front of mind. It will pay back in dividends over time. It will just feel like a cost to begin with, because as we all know, training somebody brand new or upskilling is a cost.
It's an investment
to start.
I feel for HR directors or CEOs like, find me 500 lead roles tomorrow, because talent doesn't grow on trees, and if you do cut standards, you reduce your talent density and create all sorts of issues later on. And the second thing that's quite interesting with this sort of risk of taking a short-term perspective, low morale makes the workforce. And we know at the moment, if you're in an organisation that has gone to hybrids, and you're one of those organisations where the CEO is able to come back 5 days a week, what impact is that going to have on your ability to recruit talent, keep motivation, people to stay but don't want to be there? For that reason, it's a lot about at the moment in the press.
Yeah.
So I think the importance of listening to employees and using that insight to evidence upwards around, do you have the right focus in terms of hybrid working, and invest enough in learn development to influence upwards, I think is so important at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it just knocks on to the other reasons as well that you can have a look through yourselves. Right. So in terms of optimizing the employee listening strategy,
Sure. A piece of research we can't take credit for, but is from Bamboo HR, what looks at employees leaving roles and found that roughly a third of employees, 31%, leave in the first 6 months of joining.
Yeah.
So what we've seen with our client base is more and more of our clients introduce and roll out onboarding surveys. And sometimes take a little bit of time to embed in terms of the right points of the employee life cycle. Is it week 2, week 4, for example? Sometimes it takes time to build the communications in, so employees expect them, manage to champion them to get the best response rates. But once you crack that nut, are really powerful, because what allows you to do is to really focus with leading data. Are you giving the best employee experience? Endurance really matters.
Yeah.
And if you have interventions, if you are, for example, improving the induction process, you can track that in real time to see is that sort of improving, and therefore retention. So really, some employee listening, if you haven't focused on onboarding, introducing those services can be really, really powerful.
Absolutely. And I think that bottom image there is one of my favourite things about the onboarding tool. Something that I always learn from is about how people hear about the job and how well they're getting on. Almost if you can link that, then you've got the formula for your recruitment strategy going forward, haven't you? And that's something that we've seen play out quite well.
Well, I think that data is so important. We've seen this with some of our clients in the care sector that have had this challenge for a long time, and most creative don't always have the biggest budgets. And we find some of our clients, you look at how someone's heard about the job and do they stay, quantifiably, we can help you prove with some of your data. Employees that hear about the job for referral or social media, sometimes they're much more likely to stay than those that apply for job boards. So have a look at which recruitment channels you're using that drive retention can be really powerful to look at too. So that's one of the first top tips, to really think about the onboard experience. How do you make sure that's amazing? Because that's where a lot of your talent decide to choose to stay or leave. The second thing is really linking stuff back to the bottom line. And in terms of recruitment influencing your CFOs, look at the cost of turnover. A lot of us underestimate it's not just the recruitment fee, it's the lost productivity, it's how long someone takes to ramp to the proficient to the service in your customers. If you're a salesperson, how many quarters it takes them to really know your product and sell. It's the impact on your team. It's some of those shortages you have too. I was at a hotel group recently,
Yeah.
and they had to shut the kitchen, the restaurant, on a weekend because they didn't have staff, and at that point, the impact the customer experience around that too. So we've launched a ROI calculator on the website, link on here too. They can put in your own data to make it really personalised, to look at what the impact is of improved retention on things like recruitment spend, productivity too. And the more and more you can speak your CFO's language in the current climate,
Yes,
to evidence the business case improved retention, evidence the business case investment and learn development, because it's going to reduce the reasons for people looking to leave your organization,
yeah,
the better quality conversations we're going to have and influence our business in the right way so it's sustainable.
agreed. Love this tool. It's something that's really useful around clients.
So the else you can do to really make sure you get the business focused on the long-term perspective, and really the only way to, I think, to win the war for talent, if you can't pay more everyone else, is to build a great culture, create reasons that people to sort of connect your organization's purpose and the culture and want to stay. And one of the ways you can do this is through linkage analysis, and something we run for our clients. And if you haven't done this already, we can actually partner with you and do. And these are real life examples which we've anonymized from WorkBuzz clients, where if you start with your why are you ultimately looking to improve employee engagement? Is it to improve retention? Is it to improve your customer's experience and satisfaction? And we can link your engagement metric to your other business data and prove sort of those linkages. So we found some of our clients in retail, for example, for every 1% higher the stores are in employee engagement, 1% higher customer satisfaction, it could be absence levels, whatever it may be. But finding a way to link engagement to your business KPIs is a really surefire way to sort of get buy-in from your CFO and to keep the spotlight on. If you want to drive these business outcomes, this is one of the sustainable ways of doing that.
Yeah. Great. And I think then that leads us just to a few top tips. And what we've done is group recruitment, retention, and talent engagement as a topic, because we see it as one core theme around keeping your talent and bringing on the best talent. So for 3 tips here. One, it's around listen to your employees, using any data that you can run, anything that you're running in terms of your employee listening programs, be them surveys or focus groups, however you're listening at present. Use the data points to inform your strategies and initiatives. Don't try and go it alone. Use that employee voice. The second one is about measuring what matters. Ask actionable questions. Anyone that's we kind of have join us brand new, quite often we find ourselves challenging their question set to understand, look, are you going to be able to act on the back of this? But that will enable you, especially with the onboarding exit questions and onboarding in particular, to make sure that you're intervening at the right times and getting the right data points from them to enable you to improve their experience. And the third piece is look at the linkage between your engagement or things like turnover or other data outcomes, but especially turnover for recruitment and retention. It's really critical to enable you over a year to then be able to predict future outcomes. If you link your turnover data with the engagement scores and how people have been responding in the past, you can then use it to create predicted turnover. Depending on how they now answer, you can then figure out who is more likely to leave you or most likely to leave you over the next year. So a few things to help in that space. The second piece is around focusing on well-being. We're big believers in creating moments that matter. If you had Dawn Smedley here, she'd say it in a much better accent than me. But we're all about enabling that human connection. And in terms of well-being, thinking about those most important times for employees, which it's not always at the best times in their career, sometimes at the hardest points. And if you that were there and you showed up, that's how you make sure that you help them in terms of well-being and you support the line managers to do so. Sharing authentic stories, so especially leaders, role modeling from the front. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to share your stories and create a safe space for employees to share their experiences and ask for help if they need it. And then the third piece is looking at the employee profiles that are struggling the most. I'm a big believer in looking at different data points, and demographic data can really help you hone in on those kind of segments or target groups that really need your support as HR professionals. And then once you know who they are, you can find the root cause of their challenges and implement solutions that will address those challenges rather than put on a sticking plaster or something that goes across the whole organisation but never actually gets to the root cause or helps the people that are most in need. Okay. And then finally, some top tips for productivity and performance. So firstly, looking at how HR drives the bottom line. Make sure that you share your data. Everyone else seems to bring some great KPIs to the table, so make sure that HR also has yours, and link it to the business KPIs and what you're trying to achieve in terms of your plans and business models ahead. Second piece is looking at ROI, so return on investment from the initiatives you introduce. What have you done? What's changed?
I think a really powerful example would be if you are trying to lobby for increased long-term investment development.
Yeah.
Can you look at those employees you invested in and over time, their performance or whether they stay, and compared to their peers and begin to really show the impacts on retention if that's one of the key bits of focus you at the moment.
Agreed, and especially things like talent groups or where you're making tweaks to performance or productivity elsewhere. How can you measure your impacts? And I think the final point here is around keeping that eye on the future. Let's not get too muddled in the present and the current pressures. It's really important as HR professionals and leaders that you stick your head above the parapet and look out wider. And think about this whole L&D shift. We won't be able to overcome some of the challenges we're facing unless we invest in develop new talent. So that's something that we need to keep front of mind. Okay, and then we're just going to cover AI.
You're almost at the end of the webinar, so we just wanted to share some highly relevant topic for all of you, and it's not affecting your business now. I think it will be over the coming months. In terms of how AI is shaping HR, so we asked in the survey to put next page, Matt, that's it. Okay, slide. We asked some questions really about adoption of AI at the moment, and in particular, you plan to use AI or similar automated technologies in the next 12 months. It's split there, sort of roughly half respondents to 225 organizations saying they've done it or are considering it there at the moment. We sort of split those organizations that are office-based, slightly higher adoption of AI than not office-based. But I know for spending week before last in Las Vegas at HR Tech, one of the world's biggest HR tech conferences, a huge wave of innovation coming. It really easy to underestimate how it's going to affect us in ways we don't even know yet. So something for us which we've definitely focused on. And on the bottom right, it's the applications. So what use cases for AI across your business? Marketing coming out quite high at 51%. WorkBuzz, we use AI to sort of initiate some of our sort of content and sharpen some production of that.
A lot of data and marketing to crunch and big data discussions to be mindful of. So I can see that.
So I think a whole plethora of different applications. Some of them we've seen at the moment, some are on their way, I think. And it feels, on a personal level, one of those biggest innovations since the .com era too. And one of the things, for those of you who are attending WorkBuzz Live next week, which is our flagship annual conference with 125, I think.
Yeah, but you can still register.
I think there's still lots of final places. So if you're not registered yet, it's in London, Leonardo Hotels, Wednesday first, got a handful of places left. If you want to come, feel free to message us afterwards. I think we've still got a couple of places left, I think. But we'll be talking about this in a bit more detail and sharing you a sneak preview of something we've been innovating at WorkBuzz too, which I'm super excited about as well. So much more to come on this. And I think I would predict in a future webinar, there'll be a full webinar just on AI and some research on this too.
Yeah. Right. Any questions? I think we've answered most as we go, but if you have any questions, feel free to add them and then we will answer them. I'm just going to do a wrap slide just to say a huge thank you to all for listening. We will send the webinar recording, the link to the report, and any additional resources that we've covered here.
We'll also include a link to WorkBuzz Live as well, if you haven't booked a place.
Okay, as not yet. We've got to be faster than fingers, fastest fingers get there. But the next webinar will be 5 ways HR can drive performance and productivity in 2024, a very pertinent subject and something that we hope you can join us for. But of course, if you have any further questions, then just email us at hello@workbuzz.com and we'll be happy to answer them. But a huge thank you to you all for setting aside some time to join us. It's been brilliant to see. But I don't think we've got any questions at present. So
just a thank you for me, really. I think in some, just in case more questions come through, but I think in some, we've seen over the last few years, HR really step up when we needed to, when the chips have been down, we've had this once in a generation, maybe more than that pandemic, the world of work shifts in ways we couldn't really predict it around that too. It's really important as we have a difficult time with conflict and crisis, potentially another crisis in the Middle East, or potentially it's here already around that too. We champion the employee experience. One of the only ways to really win that war for talent is through creating a great culture. It's unsustainable to always be the highest bidder in terms of salaries and pay rises around that too. But we can also soften things too around culture. And let's not take that. Let's influence our stakeholders. We take a longer term perspective. We can't complain about talent shortages if we're not invested in our own talent. It doesn't work that way. It's a big thank you from me. And hopefully we'll see many of you at WorkBuzz Live next week. But otherwise, I think that's a wrap. No more questions for you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.